The gym was glowing with laughter, music, and shimmering gowns, yet in the middle of all the lights, one girl stood in a shadow she never asked for. She was the farmer's daughter, simple but proud, her heart racing as she gathered the courage to step into prom night. But when she offered her hand to the boy she secretly admired, his rejection was cruel, and what followed was worse. Snickers turned to shouts, and before she knew it, the bullies ripped her dress apart, leaving her humiliated in front of everyone. Just when they thought she would break, she lifted her chin, clenched her fists, and delivered a roundhouse kick so fierce it silenced the entire room. That moment changed everything. The night of prom was supposed to be magical, a night filled with sparkling lights, slow dances, whispered confessions, and memories that would last a lifetime. For most of the students, it was exactly that. The gymnasium had been transformed into a shimmering wonderland, with golden streamers cascading from the ceiling, balloons tied in twinkling clusters, and a chandelier of fairy lights that bathed the entire room in a soft glow. Everyone looked their best. Designer gowns shimmered, rented tuxedos gleamed, and cameras flashed as cliques of friends posed together. It was a celebration of youth, of friendships, of freedom before the world demanded more of them. But for her, the farmer's daughter, it was more than a night of memories. It was the night she hoped she could finally step out from the shadow of ridicule that had followed her for years. She arrived in a modest dress that her mother had sewn with loving hands, made from scraps of fabric carefully stitched together. It wasn't silk, it wasn't satin, and it wasn't lined with jewels, but it carried the warmth of home, the effort of love, and the spirit of a girl who dared to believe she belonged. Her shoes were simple flats she had polished until they shone. She had braided her hair herself, weaving in tiny wildflowers she picked from the fields that morning. She didn't look like the other girls in their expensive gowns, but she had something different about her, a quiet dignity, an innocence, and a fire in her eyes that few ever noticed. For weeks, she had debated whether to attend. Her classmates had never been kind to her. They mocked her muddy boots when she came to school after chores, they laughed at her calloused hands, and whispered cruelly about her farm smell when she entered the classroom. She endured it in silence, retreating into her books, her animals, and the endless open fields of her family's land. Yet, tonight, she convinced herself that maybe things would be different. Maybe under the glowing lights, surrounded by music and laughter, she would be seen for who she truly was. And most of all, maybe he, the boy she had admired from afar, would see her. He wasn't like the others, or so she thought. He was popular, handsome, confident, the captain of the basketball team. He had a smile that made girls swoon and a charm that won teachers over. But in her eyes, he was more than just that. He was the boy who once helped her pick up her books when they fell in the hallway, the boy who had shared answers with her during a difficult exam, the boy whose laugh she secretly memorized like a melody. To her, he was proof that kindness still existed within the walls of that school. So, when the music slowed, and couples paired off for the first dance, she gathered every ounce of courage she had. She walked across the polished floor, her heart pounding so hard she felt it might burst through her chest. Every step was a battle against the voice in her head telling her to turn back, to sit down, to hide. But she silenced it with a dream, that maybe, just maybe, he would take her hand, and for one song, she would feel like she belonged. She reached him, standing with his friends near the punch table. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but she managed to ask the question that had weighed on her heart all night. Would you like to dance? For a second, silence hung between them, and she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise, maybe even hesitation. But before he could respond, his friends erupted into laughter. One of them nudged him sharply and said, "Dance with the farm girl." Seriously. Another sneered, "Careful, you'll smell like cow manure for the rest of the night." Their cruel words were daggers, sharp and merciless. He looked around, caught between her hopeful gaze and his friends' mocking grins. And in that moment, he made a choice that shattered her world. With a smirk, he shook his head and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Sorry, I don't dance with girls who smell like barns." Laughter exploded around them, echoing through the gym like thunder. Her face burned, tears stinging her eyes as whispers spread through the crowd. She wanted to vanish, to disappear into the floor, to escape the humiliation pressing down on her like a suffocating weight. But before she could retreat, the bullies closed in. The same girls who had tormented her for years circled around with gleeful eyes, sensing an opportunity to deepen her wound. One of them stepped forward, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Look at her little homemade dress," she sneered, tugging at the fabric of the farm girl's sleeve. Another joined in, mocking the flowers in her hair. "Did you pick those from the manure pile too?" The crowd chuckled, feeding their cruelty. Before she could react, hands reached for her dress. The first tear was sharp, the sound of fabric ripping piercing the air. Then another, and another. She gasped as her handmade gown, the one she and her mother had worked so hard on, began to unravel before her eyes. The laughter grew louder, and phones were raised, capturing every humiliating second. They didn't just want to break her spirit, they wanted to display her destruction for the world to see. In that moment, she felt her heart crack. Not just from the rejection of the boys she had admired, not just from the cruelty of the bullies, but from the realization that she was utterly alone in a room full of people. No one stepped forward to stop them. No one told them to leave her alone. They all watched, entertained by her suffering, complicit in her pain. Her body trembled, tears streaking down her cheeks as she clutched at the torn edges of her dress. Humiliation flooded her veins, and for a brief, fragile second, she thought she would collapse under the weight of it. But then, something shifted. Deep inside her, beneath the hurt, beneath the shame, there was a spark. A spark born from years of hard work in the fields, from lifting bales of hay heavier than most of these bullies could imagine, from mornings that began before dawn and nights that ended with aching muscles and dirt under her nails. She was stronger than they knew. She was tougher than they ever imagined. Her tears dried on her cheeks, her breathing steadied, and the trembling stopped. Slowly, she straightened, no longer clutching at the torn fabric, but letting it fall where it may. Her chin lifted, and for the first time that night, her eyes burned not with sorrow, but with fire. The girls sneered, still tugging at her dress, still laughing. "What are you gonna do about it, farm girl?" one of them taunted, and in that second, she answered without words. Her foot moved swiftly, almost instinctively, fueled by every ounce of strength she had ever built working the farm. She pivoted, her body turning with precision she didn't know she possessed. And her leg snapped through the air in a flawless roundhouse kick. The blow landed squarely on the ringleader, sending her sprawling to the floor with a gasp that silenced the laughter instantly. The room froze, mouths hung open, eyes widened, and the music screeched to a halt. No one had expected it, least of all the bullies. The farm girl, the quiet, timid girl they had ridiculed for years, had just struck back with a power none of them could deny. She stood there, her chest heaving, her braids swinging over her shoulder, wildflowers still clinging stubbornly to her hair. She didn't apologize. She didn't back down. She simply stood tall, her torn dress fluttering around her legs like a banner of defiance. In that silence, in that stillness, she was no longer the outcast, no longer the target. She was something else entirely, something untouchable. The bullies scrambled back, fear replacing their laughter. The boy she had once admired stared at her, his mouth opening but no words coming out. For the first time, he saw her, not the farm girl, not the subject of ridicule, but a force of nature, a storm in human form. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, realizing their cruelty had backfired. And in that moment, she knew something they didn't. They could rip her dress, they could try to tear her down, but they would never break her spirit again. The shock in the gym after her roundhouse kick was unlike anything the students had ever experienced. The music had stopped mid-beat, the laughter that once rang so loudly had collapsed into silence, and all that remained was the thudding echo of her foot connecting with the ringleader's body. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The girl who had been tossed around as a joke, whose dress had been torn apart in cruelty, had just shattered the script they all thought they knew. The farm girl wasn't supposed to fight back, wasn't supposed to resist. She was supposed to cower, cry, and run away. But now she stood tall in the center of the floor, her braids swinging, her chest rising and falling with defiance, her eyes lit with a fire that made the crowd uneasy. The ringleader groaned, scrambling to her feet with her cheeks flushed bright red, half from pain and half from the humiliation of being knocked down in front of everyone. She sputtered with outrage, pointing a trembling finger. She just attacked me. She shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. But no one moved to support her this time. Not even her friends. They stood frozen, wide-eyed, afraid that if they stepped forward, they might be next. The farm girl said nothing. Her silence was louder than their laughter had ever been. Her silence carried years of swallowed insults, of mockery endured, of cruel jokes ignored. Now, in this moment, she had taken control of the story. Her dress hung in tatters, the handiwork of her mother's careful stitching torn apart by jealous hands, but she wore it like armor, as if each ripped seam told the world she could not be broken. The boy she had admired, the one whose rejection had sparked this cruel chain of events, stood nearby with his friends. His face was pale, his smirk erased, his eyes darting between her and the ringleader. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to defend himself, perhaps to explain, but the words never came. He had been complicit. He had chosen their laughter over her courage, and now he was as exposed as the bullies who had torn at her dress. She met his gaze for a moment, not with the longing that had once filled her, but with the icy certainty of someone who no longer needed his validation. That fleeting connection sent a shiver down his spine. Around them, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Phones were still raised, cameras still recording, but the energy had shifted. No longer were they capturing a scene of mockery, they were documenting a moment that none of them could fully grasp yet. The farm girl had gone from victim to victor in the blink of an eye, and the footage in their hands told a story none of them had expected. Some of them lowered their phones, embarrassed to be caught as spectators of cruelty. Others kept recording, knowing deep down they were witnessing something unforgettable. The ringleader, humiliated beyond measure, lunged forward in anger, determined to reclaim her power. But the farm girl was ready. With a sharp sidestep, she avoided the clumsy attempt, her movements precise and fluid in a way that shocked even herself. Years of physical labor on the farm had given her strength and balance that no amount of gym classes could teach. Her arms had grown strong from carrying feed, her legs powerful from climbing hills and running after livestock, her reflexes honed by a life of hard work and constant motion. She wasn't a trained fighter, but she didn't need to be. Her body knew resilience in a way theirs never could. The second clash was over as quickly as it began. With a firm shove, she sent the ringleader stumbling back again, her heels slipping on the polished floor. This time, no one reached out to steady her. No one laughed. No one cheered. The air was thick with something else: respect, awe, maybe even fear. For the first time, the bullies realized they weren't in control. The girl they thought they could break had exposed their weakness, and in doing so, had stripped away their power. Her breathing steadied, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. Every eye was on her now, and though her heart hammered in her chest, she didn't falter. She had spent her whole life being looked down on, being laughed at, being treated as less. Now, she stood taller than any of them. She let the silence stretch, let them sit in the discomfort of what they had done, let them wrestle with the guilt that was beginning to creep in. Then, with a calm that surprised even herself, she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried, clear and unwavering. "You can laugh at me. You can rip my dress. You can try to tear me down. But you'll never take away who I am." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. They were not just a declaration to the bullies who had mocked her, but to every single person in that gym who had watched and done nothing. It was a challenge, a mirror held up to their cowardice. Some of them looked down at their shoes, unable to meet her eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably, fidgeting with their phones. But no one dared to laugh. The ringleader, red-faced and trembling, finally retreated, her pride too shattered to endure another confrontation. Her friends followed, their usual confidence crumbling under the weight of the farm girl's unflinching stance. The crowd slowly parted, leaving her standing alone in the center of the room, illuminated by the soft glow of the fairy lights above. For once, she wasn't hidden in the shadows. She wasn't the butt of a cruel joke. She was the story. The music hadn't resumed, the chatter hadn't returned. The entire prom had been transformed by what had just happened. And in the stillness, she realized something she had never allowed herself to believe before. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their acceptance. She had her own strength, her own worth, her own fire that no one could extinguish. The rejection that once stung so deeply now felt irrelevant, a meaningless gesture from someone who had proven he wasn't worthy of her admiration in the first place. She walked toward the exit, her steps steady, each one echoing with the power of her newfound confidence. People moved aside without being asked, their eyes following her with a mixture of awe and shame. Some whispered apologies under their breath, too afraid to say them aloud. Others simply watched in silence, knowing that nothing they could say would erase the cruelty of their laughter. As she reached the doors, she paused and looked back one last time. The room that had once seemed so beautiful, so magical, now looked different. The decorations, the gowns, the lights, they all felt shallow compared to the strength she had found within herself tonight. She didn't belong to their world of empty glitter and fragile pride. She belonged to something greater, something rooted in authenticity and resilience. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the scent of earth and grass, the familiar comfort of home. The torn dress fluttered in the breeze, no longer a symbol of shame, but of survival, of victory, of rebirth. Each rip, each tear, was a reminder of what she had endured and overcome. She smiled faintly, not because the night had gone as she had hoped, but because it had revealed who she truly was. Back inside, the whispers would grow into stories, the videos would spread, and her name would be spoken in tones of shock and reverence. Some would twist the tale, some would exaggerate it, but the truth would remain the same. The farm girl who was mocked, rejected, and humiliated had risen from the ashes of their cruelty and shown them all a strength they could never forget. And though she hadn't gone to prom expecting to change anything, she had left a mark on every single person who witnessed her defiance. As she walked down the quiet road leading back to the farm, her bare feet brushing against the gravel after discarding her torn shoes, she felt lighter than she had in years. The humiliation that once threatened to consume her had become fuel for her strength. The rejection that once broke her heart had freed her from illusions. She no longer dreamed of fitting into their world, because she had discovered a truth far more powerful: she didn't need to. The barn lights glowed in the distance, welcoming her home. She could already hear the soft nickers of the horses, the gentle rustle of the chickens settling in for the night, the symphony of sounds that had always been her comfort. Here, in the place where she belonged, she could shed the weight of their judgment. She would continue to rise with the sun, work the land, care for the animals, and live a life built on strength and authenticity. And when she looked back on that night years later, she wouldn't remember the cruelty of the bullies or the rejection of a boy who lacked courage. She would remember the moment she discovered the power of her own spirit, the night she stopped being a victim and became a force to be reckoned with. And though the world might continue to throw challenges in her path, she knew now that she could face them all. Because she had faced the cruelest night of her youth and emerged stronger, fiercer, unbreakable.